What is up, everybody? Welcome back to WahWahMusic. I'm your host, Kevin Godfrey. Today we are here for the fourth installment, number 4, of my Album of the Year series. For those of you who are not familiar, basically what I do here is I consider myself kind of like a newbie music listener, and I want to try to listen to like as much of the music as I can. Obviously you can't listen to all the music, but I like to try to listen to as much as I can. So I end up picking a year, 1 year at a time, and I just go back and try to listen through as much of like the essentials and maybe some deeper, more unappreciated cuts from each of those years. Really just do a deep dive, scrub the bottom of the barrel as much as I can. Obviously it's kind of hard to listen to, a whole year's worth of music in a short spell, but anyways, this video has been about 2 months in the making, so of course any likes, any subscribes, any comments you have to say to me are very appreciated over here at WahWahMusic. We love you all. Mwah, 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 mwah. Now so far we've done the years 1997, we've done 2015, we've done 2000, and now we're finally doing 1979 as our fourth. And I will say this was one of the more interesting years for me to look back on, especially just because of how limited my musical knowledge, I guess, goes back to 1979. I can't say it, like going into this year, I had only listened to like 4 albums, I think, from this year that I could like think of. But I mean, now that I've been through it, I've listened to a total of about 90 albums, I think, just based on you guys sending me everything. I try to, like, if you guys don't know it already or you're not already, follow me at WahWah.music on Instagram, because that's where I talk about like everything. That's kind of like my base of operations for this whole WahWah whatever project. I really try to hound you guys on there to like send me any and everything you've ever heard from 1979, because I don't want to miss anything, Obviously, of course I'm going to miss stuff, but like I'd rather not miss something big that like worst case scenario, I don't want to listen to an album, be like, this is amazing, I love this thing to death, this is great, and then find out it came out in one of these years I've already done and be like, oh, well, I didn't put it on my lists suck, I need to go back, I need to fix stuff. No, we're getting this right. So, anyways, you guys get it, you guys know the deal. You guys sent me music, I listened to as much of it as I could. I Google searched a bunch of albums, went through all those rate your music lists online, went through all just Google Wikipedia articles, following artists to other artists, looking at when the releases came out, notable artists, seeing if they dropped anything in 79, just whatever I could do. And I came out 90 albums listened, 20 honorable mentions, 25 albums on my Album of the Year list, per usual, so 45 total picks. That's like half the albums I listened to, but here we are, and I hope you guys enjoy my picks for 1979 Album of the Year. Usually I start out with EPs, but honestly I didn't listen to any EPs from this year. Moving on from that, we've got our second piece, which is honorable mentions. Now, one thing I wanted to talk a little bit more, normally I just list off my honorable mentions, but I thought 1979 is such an interesting year that I feel like I learned a lot about, like music-wise and influence-wise. I will say, okay, so over the course, my last album of the year, I did 2000, right? And I said multiple times that I felt like that was just an absolute powerhouse year for hip-hop, like classic hip-hop albums. You got, I'm not going to think of all of them, but Marshall Mathers LP, Supreme Clientele by Ghostface Killah, Violent by Design, Jedi Mind Tricks, The Unseen Quasimodo, Stankonia, Outkast, a couple more, Deltron 3030, I don't know if I mentioned that one already, but all of that in 1 year, craziness. Now, if 2000 was the year of hip-hop, I would consider 79 to be the year of post-punk. And I think the cool thing about 79 is that post-punk wasn't really like a thing, it wasn't really established. I think the term didn't even come out until like maybe like a year before 79. I could be wrong on that. I think it was like 78 or 77 that someone first coined post-punk as a term. But 79 seems kind of like the year of like the genesis or like the baby shower of post-punk. Like it was kind of a fetus of an idea prior to 79, and then 79 was where it kind of plopped out into the world, and it was demonstrated across all of these different artists and bands, and like who had their own kind of visions and ideas of a concept or of a sound, and then we just get to see that here. So I'm going to start out with honorable mentions, just going to mention 5 quick post-punk bands or post-punk albums that I thought were really good, didn't make the list, but they made an honorable mention. So we've got Cut by the Slits, random super fun fact, but the singer and front person for the band, her mom actually married the singer and front person of another band that actually made the list in this year, 1979. So in this year, 1979, the front person for the Slits became the daughter-in-law of the front person of another band that's on this list, which is weird, but I'll tell you who that is once we get there. But anyways, moving on, we've also got the Raincoat self-titled. We've got Three Imaginary Boys by The Cure. Wasn't quite The Cure yet, but still a great post-punk album. We've got Setting Suns by The Jam, and we've got Live at the Witch Trials by The Fall. The Fall did 2 albums this year, I think. They also released Dragnet, which I was not quite huge on, and not quite as big as Live at the Witch Trials at least. But if you like that, if you like Live at the Witch Trials and you want more, check out their other one, Dragnet, from this year. Moving on to another sound that I was very not too familiar with coming into this year, in fact I could say like basically not familiar with at all, is New Wave. New Wave, if you asked me anything about New Wave prior to like starting this series, I would have just been like, I don't know. Like I literally just don't know. And I still am pretty shaky on it. All I've really done is just listen to more New Wave albums, I guess. But 3 albums that I'm pretty sure are considered New Wave from this year that I enjoyed, or that I thought were worthy of honorable mentions, are Drums and Wires by XTC, Cool for Cats by Squeeze, and the B-52's self-titled album. Moving on again, we have some synth pop albums from '79, which is a sound of synth pop I'm not familiar with at all, but I thought these albums were great. So Solid State Survivor by Yellow Magic Orchestra, The Pleasure Principle by Gary Newman, Number One in Heaven by The Sparks, and Replicas by Two Boy Army. Check those out. Moving on further to more of the scattered honorable mentions, Bad Girls by Donna Summer, great disco album. Sun Ra and his orchestra released 4 albums this year. I listened to all of them, and I thought they were all pretty solid, but Sleeping Beauty was definitely my favorite, so I decided to add that as an honorable mention. Sleeping Beauty by Sun Ra. Tusk by Fleetwood Mac, thought was great. Not as good as their other releases, or specifically the release right before this, but still some solid songs. Overkill by Motorhead, can't go wrong with some Motorhead. In Through the Outdoor by Led Zeppelin, not what I would be expecting from Led Zeppelin or a Led Zeppelin album, and definitely some songs that I wasn't huge on, but there are still some pretty catchy tunes on this one. Moving on, we got Survival by Bob Marley and the Wailers. I mean, it's Bob Marley, you can't go wrong. I mean, that being said, this is one of Bob Marley's weaker albums, I think, but still, it's still better than a sea of other artists. Still going on, we got The Specials, self-titled, The Specials. The two-tone ska. I don't know too much about ska. My ska listening is limited, but from what I can gather, they're one of the more influential and one of the greater ska acts, so definitely check that out. And then my last honorable mention I just want to throw on here because I thought it was really interesting is Heresy by a band called Universe Zero. It sounds like a very heavy, atmospheric rock album, honestly kind of reminiscent of like a lot of elements that remind me of post-rock, which I thought was really interesting because obviously post-rock, we don't really credit it being started until like, I want to say 12 years later. I think a lot of people say Spiderland and like Laughing Stock are kind of like the roots, maybe some, yeah, I think those are 2 of the root post-rock albums we'll talk about. Again, I'm very limited in knowledge in post-rock at least, but interesting that this album reminded me a lot about a post-rock album, and I was like, whoa, it's very different than the vast majority of the other albums of this year, so I thought I'd give it a spot. And that's all for that. Now it's time to move straight on ahead to our actual list, top 25 albums of 1979. Here we go. Okay, so beginning at number 25, we have one of the most weird out there albums I've probably ever listened to, which is Eskimo by The Residents. Now this album is it's one of the few, I feel like you constantly hear the criticism with stuff like Death Grips or like 100 Gex, where it's like this isn't even music, bro. Like, what even is this I'm listening to? This isn't even music. But I think that is definitely a thought that crossed my mind as I was listening to this album, because it's very loose, very loose as far as what it tries to go for thematically. It's a, I guess, ambient, experimental album that is supposed to mimic the Western view of Eskimos, and in a way it's supposed to parody our racist, like, colonization Western mindset of Eskimo northern traditions. And when you listen to it with that in mind, it makes a lot more sense. But when I first listened to it, I was like, what? But at the same time, that what is enough to warrant, like, this is probably worth something, because nothing else in this year, save a few other albums, really weirded me out to this level. Now, coming in number 24, we have Breakfast in America by Supertramp. This thing is a progressive pop powerhouse with just like, this is one of those albums that each and every track I was like, oh, I know that song. I just didn't know it was from here. Oh, I know that song. I didn't know it was from here. And then as I went through and as I listened through, I was like, okay, yeah, I remember this song. I've heard this on the radio before or wherever I've heard it, like maybe in a movie or something. I've definitely come across a lot of the songs on this thing. And let me just say, putting it back on and then kind of spinning it slightly in the rotation, I ended up just keep on going like, man, those are really catchy, you know? I'm going to play them again. I'm going to play them again. I'm going to play them again. And I don't know, I feel like it's interesting that I don't hear this talked about more when I hear people talk about like influential pop albums, especially like progressive pop albums, because I feel like there's a lot of really solid, great stuff on this, and it sure had some earworms that were clutching me for at least this past month and a half. Coming in at number 23, we got Johnny Osborne with Truths and Rights. This is a solid roots reggae album. The grooves across this thing are just flowing. The songwriting is amazing. Honestly, you compare the songwriting on this one to the Bob Marley release from this year, no contest, in my opinion. All the songs and themes are very topical, very reggae-esque, and Johnny Osborne's got a really nice voice, and the whole aesthetic of the project just feels very nicely like woven together. Alright, now coming in at number 22, we have Chrome with Half Machine Lip Moves. This is one of the earliest examples of, I guess, a noise rock, or like what I've become familiar with associating with noise rock. Considering a lot of the experimentation and noisier passages in this album, it's surprisingly catchy. There's a lot of really good riffs and really great moments to really hang your attention onto. And I will say, even though it feels a little bit bloated at like an hour and 20 minutes, this thing is just loaded with so many moments of like experimentation that you can just feel how grand its influence has been on the noise rock genre. Coming in at number 21, we have probably the grodiest album on the list with Joe's Garage, Act 1 through 3 by Frank Zappa. This is actually one of two Frank Zappa albums, the other one being Chic Your Booty, which I was not quite as crazy about, although it has a funny name. This thing is a massive rock opera that is not afraid of being very gross and kind of out there as far as content and subject matter. It's very funny, it's very tongue-in-cheek. I don't usually like music like this, but there are more than enough epic moments on this thing that I can't ignore just how good it is. Coming in number 20, we have Public Image Limited's Metal Box. Now, this is the album I was talking about, or this is the band I was talking about, fronted by John Lydon of the previous Sex Pistols. He ended up marrying the lead singer of the Slits. I can't remember her name right now, but her mom, so that's who I was talking about, John Lydon. Anyways, this is another one of those monumental post-punk albums released this year. Super gritty, super dark, super like, feels like you're like in a cave kind of. It's got that like almost like echo factor to it. And apparently it's amazing to sniff glue to, as demonstrated by our pals here. I will say just a random tip if you want to listen to this on streaming service, because I couldn't find it on streaming service. It's not actually named Metal Box. Here, one sec, let me check. It's actually under the name Second Edition, and the album cover kind of looks like this, but it's the same album as Metal Box, so if you want to listen to Metal Box, but it's not on streaming services, Second Edition, Public Image Limited, you can check that out. Coming in number 19, we got Lodger by David Bowie. This is an album I really struggle to classify under a genre, so I guess I'll just say like art rock, but it definitely feels like there is a plethora of influences here from like, I want to say African music to maybe like dub to a lot of new wave stuff. I don't know, it's very expansive, and it feels like he's throwing all of these ideas and not a lot of them should stick, but it actually ends up panning out really well for him over the course of the project. Like over a few listens, there was a lot of things I was like, I don't necessarily like the way that sounds. Like, it wasn't like my favorite, but when I finish listening to the whole project and I revisit, I just like, it works. It works so well. Like, it's not my favorite, but it legitimately worked really well for him and for this project and within the scope of Lodger. Yeah, this is another hit for David Bowie. This is the second David Bowie album we've looked at. I think I listened to that 97 David Bowie album too, which is way different than this. Way different, which just shows how versatile of an artist he is. But yeah, Lodger by David Bowie. Coming in at number 18, we have A Can of Bees by the Soft Boys. Now, this album, apparently, when I Googled, is classified as post-punk, which I didn't really see when I was listening to, as well as neo-psychedelia, which I definitely didn't see. But considering that I disagree with both of these genre definitions, and I honestly can't think of anything else other than just, I guess, regular punk or maybe psych rock, we'll just call it that for now. This is one of those albums from this year I'm surprised I haven't heard more about, because it is seriously a powerhouse album. I mean, this thing is so fun, it's got like this tongue-in-cheek feel, and the vocalist, I love the vocalist. Honestly, some of the best vocal performances of this entire year that I heard. He's got a very strong, charismatic sound to him that I feel like a lot of other, I guess like in the post-punk field, kind of miss for me, aside from obviously some of the people who you'll see higher up on this list. And then of course, with that taken into account, the band is just rockin'. Do not miss this one if you have not heard it yet. A Can of Bees by the Soft Boys. Coming in at number 17, we have Neil Young and Crazy Horse with Rust Never Sleeps. Now, I'm not super familiar with Neil Young or his music or Crazy Horse, but I obviously have heard about their influence, and I know of them a lot because I've heard about them, because they are very influential musicians. That is very well showcased on this thing right here. Neil Young is an excellent folk singer-songwriter. His voice is very, very unique and definitely helps carry a lot of his songwriting, just kind of like keeps you sledding over the rest of the instrumentation of the band. It feels kind of like like a sled. Like a sled. I'd say a sled. His voice feels like the sled that's pulling you across the rest of the band. And as you're traveling in his sled, the actual songwriting is just what you're looking at from direction to direction. And then all the bumps and hicks in the road are just the band doing their due. Coming in number 16, we've got Talking Heads, Fear of Music. Now, don't crucify me, but I'm not the hugest Talking Heads fan. In fact, just listening to this album, I had heard heaps and heaps and heaps of praise on it. In fact, I even did a cute little poll amongst my Instagram followers, aka probably everyone watching this video right now, and I asked you guys to send me in your album of the year for 1979, and Fear of Music crushed the polls. I think I had, it didn't crush. 6 people sent it in as their album of the year, which was way more than any other album got submitted. I think second was Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division with 4 times, so not that far away, but still, the fact that 6 individual people uncommunicated were like, Fear of Music, Fear of Music, Fear of Music, Fear of Music. I was like, okay, dang, maybe I am like underrating this album, so I went back to it and back to it and back to it. It's probably one of the albums that I honestly went back to the most, because I was like, there's got to be something here I'm not getting. There's got to be something here that I'm missing. And to be honest, I don't think there was anything too big that I was missing. I think it definitely did grow on me a lot, but I don't think there was any like huge revelation where I was just missing something that like, oh, it clicked and I got it now. I think I just progressively listened to it, and I grew to really appreciate the instrumental variety of like cultural influences. I've heard a lot about African polyrhythms. Apparently that's a big thing, and of course just listening to David Byrne just spaz for 40 minutes. It's something to hear. Definitely not an album to miss. Incredibly influential. I can see why. Alright, I'm going to preface this by saying there are a few genres that I just can't really get into, or I'm not that big of a fan of, and one of those genres is pop punk. I know, and I bet you're wondering why the hell am I talking about pop punk when we're talking about 1979, and I'm about to explain why, because my number 15 pick for 1979 is the Undertones, we're going this way, the Undertones self-titled album, The Undertones. This is, after doing some light reading on the Wikipedia, this is one of the prototypes of the pop punk sound, which is really interesting for me to see, because going into this I was just like, man, this is just a really catchy punk album, and there was really nothing else like in the punk, post-punk realm that sounded anything like this. I was like, whoa, this is like really solid, but also at the same time it did have that pop edge where I was like, these are really mainstream. I could see these playing on the radio like all the time. Like songs like Teenage Kicks, like ridiculously catchy, like stuck in my head the entire time I've been doing this series. But yeah, and beyond all that, incredibly charismatic vocalist, love the singer. That's one thing that also I really struggle with on a lot of pop punk bands. I think the singers are kind of annoying, but this singer, just too much charisma. The guitars are heavy and gritty. It's got like a drive and a chugging to it, and it's just like pushing you through, and he's just going off. He's singing, and that guitar's just great, infectious stuff. Check it out if you haven't. Undertones self-titled. Coming in at number 14, we have The Damned with Machine Gun Etiquette. Now, for those of you who don't know, I am a massive Dead Kennedys fan, but I also have not exposed myself to like that much punk. Like, I've listened to a lot of hardcore punk. I think Dead Kennedys were one of the first punk groups that I really got into, and I was like, whoa, I really, really like this. And I couldn't quite find anything else. Or there's a few bands out there, but it was tough to find things that really scratched my Dead Kennedys itch, I guess. And Machine Gun Etiquette by The Damned was one of those albums that not necessarily was like, oh, this scratches my Dead Kennedys itch, but it kind of reminded me of that Dead Kennedys itch and kind of scratched around it and gave me some like new kind of itches, I guess, where I was like, ooh, this is really solid. Bass, guitar, drums, everything is totally killer. Classic anti-establishment messaging. The song Anti-Pope is a banger. Quick runtime. It's everything I could ever love and adore about a hardcore punk album, and it's just there. Climbing higher up our list now, we're at the 13th spot. Coming in 13, we have Why by the pop group. Now this is a incredibly experimental post-punk album, but still falls under the post-punk banner because of its influence and what it kind of did in the genre. But this thing is just a fucking spaz of an album, man. Every single song, it's like you can't sit on the same sounds and the same influences. Each and every song, they're like adding a new piece to the puzzle. They're going like the puzzle's already done. The puzzle's been done for 4 songs, but they just like keep dumping a new box of puzzle pieces on it and being like, no, we can add to it. And it's like, no, we can't. None of these pieces connect. And then they just like, I don't know, they close the door, you come back later, and all of a sudden the puzzle's just like this weird fucking hexagonal shape, and you're like, what the fuck did they do to this thing? But it works. And you're listening and you're like, it works. It's gritty, it's dark, it's post-punk. Not much more I could say about this thing. I'm sure if you're familiar with post-punk, you've already listened to it. If you haven't, why aren't you listening to it right now? Coming in at number 12, we have London Calling by The Clash, a incredibly well-known and renowned punk album, which I'm sure you've heard. Just the title track, London Calling, is like massive, 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 massive. I will say that I love To the Moon and Back, all of the very punk tracks on this thing, although I am still kind of middle of the road with a lot of the more ska cuts on it. I can't say that I'm the hugest ska fan. I definitely don't have as big of appreciation of it as I probably should, and I definitely feel like if I was way huger into ska, this thing would see a much higher spot on this list. But because of that, I feel like I adore the punk songs, but some of the more ska songs I just really struggle to get into. But that being said, even the ska songs that I feel like I'm not quite there for me, or that aren't quite there for me, I still feel like they're amazing, and I will willingly like just throw this on over and over and over again. I mean, I've already played it. It's probably in like my top 10 most listened to of these albums on this list. Like, there is insane replay value. It's all so catchy. Singer's got charisma. There's just this, I just keep talking about singers having charisma, but that's honestly what I freaking love. His voice also is fucking, wow. London calling, and I don't want to shout. Coming in at a spanking number 11, we have Pink Floyd with The Wall. Now, if there is another genre besides pop punk that I'm not very huge on, it's prog rock. There are a lot of prog rock albums that I love, but whenever I try to go beneath the surface of prog rock, I don't know, I just get bored, honestly. Thankfully, this is not beneath the surface. This is right on the surface of prog rock. Yeah, I mean, this is honestly one of those albums that I was pretty familiar with before I got into this, like that frickin' "We Don't Need No Education." I mean, who is not familiar with that? That just shows you like the influence of this album. And songs like "Comfortably Numb" and "Hey You," oh, those have been on my iTunes since I was like 10. Non-stop. Anyways, going through this album was more like taking a trip down memory lane and seeing how thematically all of these great tunes and influential songs kind of fit into this The Wall narrative that Pink Floyd creates here. And needless to say, it ends up working great. Obviously, we all have kind of heard culturally about The Wall, and yeah. Except for Nostalgia Critic. I think I heard you did like a diss track to the album or something like that. I don't really know how that all worked out. I didn't really look into it, but I did hear about Nostalgia Critic doesn't like The Wall, so listen to it again, Nostalgia Critic. You didn't have the right ear. You didn't have the right headphones on. You didn't have the right headphones on. Next time, listen to it with better headphones. We're in the top 10, boys. Things are getting serious. These are only the good albums. All the other ones are trash. These are the only good ones. Starting off number 10, we have by James Chance and the Contortions. Now this album, what the fuck? This thing is fucking weird. If I had to put it to a metaphor, I would say it feels like you're on a bus, right? And you're like riding around, you're seeing the sights, and a crack addict like takes over the bus, and he's like freaking out and spazzing, and like you kind of feel like your life's in danger, you know, because a crack addict just took over the bus, but also like it's kind of hard to take him seriously because a lot of the things he's saying. That's how I feel with this album. It's like I'm like, whoa, this is like a lot and like intense, but also I'm like, I got a smile on my face and I'm kind of like trying to hold in a laugh because I'm like, wow, this is like a lot, you know? It's that very similar emotion I feel like this album makes me feel, of like, you're seeing all this craziness, but you can't help but like kind of poke at the silliness in it all and kind of get a little smile. Some of these songs on a first listen just sound straight up fucking obnoxious, which some of them they are, you know. It definitely has a, I think I saw someone who wrote like a comment on this or something, and they were like, yeah, this just proves that if you have a solid rhythm section, you can just do whatever the fuck you want over the top of it. And honestly, this is probably one of the better truths of that statement, or one of the better proofs of that statement, because it's just like, you hear the drum line, you hear the drum, you hear the bass, you're like, okay, we're grooving, and you just hear, and I'm like, yeah, but at the same time, it is still so damn catchy somehow, this fucking blender of genres and sounds, and just, splatter on the wall. What's that one guy? Pollock? Is he the guy who does the splatter? I'm actually gonna Google that really quick. Jackson Pollock. Yeah, this is like a Jackson Pollock painting where it's just splattered on the wall and it's just like, what the fuck is going on? This is so chaotic. But still there's like something very like satisfying on the eyes to it, except for the ears. So yeah, that's my number 10 pick. Something smells like it's burning. Even further down our list, number 9, we have Wire with 154. Now this album, literally, just to tell you how it kind of hit me, this was one of the first albums I listened to for this series, and as soon as I listened to it, I went back and listened to their 2 previous albums, Pink Flag, and there's one about the chairs that I can't remember right now. All fantastic. I listened to this and I was like, whoa. Like, it is insanely striking how similar this, like, brand or lane of post-punk is to the post-punk that I'm kind of used to hearing today. And that's I think one of the more interesting things about going back in this year is seeing just how, like, wide of a blanket post-punk seems to be in 79 versus the post-punk that, like, I know today, you know? Like, I feel like when you listen to post-punk today, it's a very distinct sound, whereas in 79, it wasn't really established. It was, like, kind of more of an idea than, like, a genre. So when I heard 154, I was like, whoa, this is just post-punk. Like, I know this. I know this when I hear it. This is post-punk 100%. And it's very clear to see that they are definitely one of the more influential bands in post-punk. And also, it doesn't hurt that the songs are also fucking great. There's a very weird, very eerie kind of like floatiness to the whole thing. It feels like you're drifting through from like story to story and like experience to experience. And there's also some very heavy, like surprisingly heavy moments on this thing where the guitars are like, I feel like I'm listening to like almost like a metal album. Coming in number 8, we have the new wave album Look Sharp by Joe Jackson. So damn catchy, man. Literally off the first listen, I think like later that night I was singing some of these songs to myself. And this is one of those albums that like when I go through my process and when I listen to albums, there are some albums that I'm not expecting to like that much, you know? So I kind of listen to them all in a bundle and I'm like, okay, the ones that stuck out to me more, I'll spend way more time revisiting. This one I was like, I listened to in that kind of grouping of things and I was like, okay, yeah, that was pretty good. There were some really catchy tunes on there. And then I just noticed like that night, I was like, I have like 4 songs from this album somehow all stuck in my head at the same time. And I was like, And since then, I just keep coming back and back and back. And recently, every day I wake up, I throw this on. I'm doing my little tasks around the apartment. I'm fixing up this, doing the dishes, cleaning the bathroom. This is playing, and I'm just singing every single word. I think I already memorized like every single song on this album, which is something I don't think I can say for any of the other albums, but this thing is just so quotable, so catchy, so fun. It's just like insane how he was able to bottle all of that up into this one album. And there's also some really fun influences, like some dub and reggae sound. The bass across all of these songs is so like bubbly and fun. I'm just like, ooh. Also, super danceable, so it gets plus for me for that. Coming in number 7, we have a very different album from Joe Jackson's Look Sharp. We have 20 Jazz Funk Greats by Throbbing Gristle. This thing is probably one of the more deceptive albums I've ever listened to, because looking at the album cover and the album name, you're like, this will probably be a pretty pleasant album, maybe, and you'd be wrong. This is another one of those albums where you kind of hear it and you realize how little anything else sounds like this, at least in my listening from this year. There's not really anything else that reminds me of this at all. It's like very experimental, minimal. There's like lots of synths being used here, which obviously now, tell me about it, synths, right? But among listening to the stuff within the year, it's like, whoa, this thing is so out there. And it's industrial, there's these noises and screeches, and it's got this like underlying just like predatory like vibe, like a bloodlust to it. Oh, it's just like, it's gritty, grimy, gross. Does not at all look like the aesthetic presented, which I feel like is just another dimension to its own aesthetic of being such like a predatory album, as I'm calling it here. But yeah, very eerie, very haunting, dark industrial in 1979. I mean, I don't know who else was doing this back then. I mean, if other people were doing it, I don't think they were coming anywhere close to Throbbing Gristle with this, because this thing is insane. Coming in number 6, we have an album that I publicly battled with. If you were following me on Instagram at the time, I was posting my thought process as I was handling my first listen of this album on my story, and man, this thing like broke me down and built me back up again 4 times. I'm talking about Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach. It is a 3-hour opera, but not a traditional opera. It is considered a minimalist classical project, and man, I think my original descriptor was that the songs remind me of if you took like, you know, Nathan's on the Moon by Death Grips, the first half of the Powers That Be. If you took like those songs and you took just the Bjork samples and the way they patterned them, and you cut everything else out of the song and it's just the Bjork samples, and it's just those, and you just loop it for 20 minutes long, but you do that for every single song, you know? So like, I'm sure that sounds great, and it's not, you know? It's really not. But this is also one of those albums that I feel like I sat through and I listened to, and I was just like, I'm gonna end it. I can't do this. I can't listen to all this. If I have to listen to another hour of girls going, ha, hoo, ha, to.to, I'm gonna blow my brains out over the keyboard, which I didn't do, and you shouldn't do it either. But by the end, I just, you know, it really starts getting in your head. You're like, is this terrible? Is this horrible? Or is this man just an absolute genius? And it's unfortunate, it really is, but I think he is an absolute genius. Because upon going back, and heavens no, I have not listened to the whole album again, because I don't think my heart could handle that. But just listening through bits and pieces of the different acts and stuff, there is a clear, overarching, very abstract story and progression of what's going on, and there's not much more out there that has really evoked the emotions and made me think on the same level that this album has. So for that, I have to give it a high spot. We did it. Broke in the top 5. Number 5, we have Off the Wall by Michael Jackson. I said this on my story earlier, but if you can make it all the way through this album without fighting the desire to get up and like physically dance around at least once, there is something fundamentally wrong with you, as like on a psychological level, that I hope you get figured out before you die. Like legitimately, from the bottom of my heart, I'm praying for you. And it's crazy because the first listen to this album, I definitely was like enjoying myself and like dancing around a bit, and I was like, yeah, this is like a really solid like disco, like make me want to dance album. Especially because like I don't have much experience in disco, but I was like, this is pretty killer right here. And it wasn't until like a few days ago when I was making breakfast, and I just had this playing. I played through the whole album as I was making breakfast and cleaning the dishes, and it was probably like one of the most blissful making breakfast and cleaning dishes experiences I've ever had on this planet. Track after track after track. It's so catchy, and you're just listening to those bass lines, and it just keeps going and going, and then the thing is like one song ends and you're like, dang, that was a really good song. It's one of those, each song like is one of the songs on the album that you feel like is like, wow, I'm saving that one. Like you're listening to a song here, I'll do a demonstration. This is you. You're listening to an album, right? You're like, okay, whoa, I've never heard this before. Okay, this first song, ooh, okay, I like this. We're gonna save that. And then you're still listening through the second song, you're like, ooh, oh, okay. He's like, save this. And then you're listening, you're doing your thing. Third song, you're kidding. Like, another one? Save, and then the album's over. And guess what? You just saved all the songs. And then you're like, huh, that album's fucking fantastic. And that's what this album is. Coming in at number 4, you've probably seen it on a t-shirt before. I'm talking about Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. The arguably the most influential post-punk album, the most the archetype of turned the punk and rock world industry on its head with this totally crazy out there wild album, Unknown Pleasures. Now, I personally only found out that Ian Curtis had killed himself because of a Juju song, but for those of you who actually are in touch with pop culture and know what goes on, you know what the whole very depressing atmosphere and vibe behind Joy Division and Ian Curtis's lyrics and vocal delivery. They're really unholy and like dark songwriting and atmospheres they create really lend themselves to show why they've served as such like a pinnacle for goth and, you know, the dark aesthetic in pop culture. I mean, through so many years at this point, 40 years plus at this point. Despite such a short run, Ian Curtis has got to go down as like one of the best frontmen of any band ever. This is just one of those records that has unparalleled influence all throughout the music world. Besides, outside of just sound, there's really not too much praise you can give to this album. Although I did only put it in my 4th spot, it's just because I think that these 3 albums are a little bit better and I enjoyed them a little more. But yeah, Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. Coming in at number 3, we have Entertainment by Gang of 4. Just to show you guys really quick, because I forgot to do it earlier for Wire, what this Discovery Channel bit has led me to do. I ended up copping this bad boy last time I was at the record store, obviously, this album right here. And I even ended up getting this one because I love this one so much. And I just saw it and it said it was an import and I was like, cool. So, hey, there you go. Wah Cops. I ended up copping a couple records because of this. I don't think, just like how I said, Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, I couldn't give it enough praise. I feel the exact same way about Entertainment by Gang of 4. There are so many like elements and so many different like aspects of this record that are so just like mind-boggling to like when you really like lay it all down on the table and you're like, wow, they really did all of this in a debut. Which, I mean, Joy Division did the same thing, but wow, seriously, wow. Like there's such a honestly of the post-punk, like of the influence on post-punk, I think that this has got to be probably my favorite sound of post-punk. They added this is easily the funkiest album, the most danceable post-punk album, which honestly, danceability, maybe not for everyone it's important, but if an album is like you can dance around to it, it gets good noodle points plus 30 for me, I don't know. There is such like an obvious influence on anything dance punk, which I love a lot of dance punk. So I'm seeing that influence, hearing it here, was already like, ooh. I mean, my first listen through, not too much actually caught me. Damaged Goods instantly caught me. I was like, wow, this track fucks, and it really does. And then you go through the rest of it, and slowly it starts to grow on you. There's such like a simple, just like driving guitar line that is like, in and of itself, catchy. Like, even though you might not find the lyrics to be the most catchy, the guitar ends up being the catchy part that earworms in you because it's so basic, it's so repetitive, and it just drives you. The drums are just back there, they're kind of doing their own thing, a little tinny, feel kind of like shitty drums. I don't know, I'm not huge on post-punk drums. And then that guitar though, and the bass is just fucking chugging away, man, oh my god. And then you couple all of that with such like a concise and topical album concept. The whole idea, like every single song, when you really start to dive into the lyrics and you really unite the themes of each and every song over the course of the record, it's like a really, really tongue-in-cheek, satirical, like scathing commentary, like a very punk attitude, but in a very non-punk feel, I guess. Just critiques on like modern relationships, love, critiques on all these very normalized things that seem kind of like, not like they seem kind of not like quite sacred, but very well accepted and well regarded. So family relationships, things like exploitation between relationships. There's this very sense of like sticking up for the little guy in this album. It's an incredibly politically feeling and fueled album, but I think that that's honestly a lot of the times when punk shines the brightest, as obviously showcased here. So you can dance your ass off while listening to some very insightful satire. I mean, even just the album cover. I don't know if you can actually see this on like the digital. I only saw it when I had the physical in my hand. But it literally shows this little thing of the zoom up of Indian and a cowboy shaking hands and then just zooming in on them. And the text says, "The Indian smiles, he thinks that the cowboy is his friend. The cowboy smiles, he is glad the Indian is fooled. Now he can exploit him." So that honestly gives you a pretty good synopsis of what kind of an attitude to expect from this record. Coming in at number 2, what I honestly expected was going to be my number 1 going into this, because if you guys follow me on Instagram, you know that I fucking adore this album. It is This Heat, self-titled. This is one of the very few albums that I'd heard before I had come to 1979, and it has always been, I consider, one of my favorite albums of all time, because I am like just blown away at what they're able to create on this thing. It is the most, not the most, but it is a very experimental, weird, I guess maybe you could call it post-punk. I wouldn't. I think their next album is probably post-punk, more so than this. This thing is barely anything other than experimental, honestly. There's such a weird, eerie overflow to everything. You don't really know what's going on, what's happening. There's not really much to tether yourself to. All you can really do is, it just leaves you in this kind of open, wide space of sound. And every time there is a sound or there is something going on, your mind is tethered to that. And just that, there's just that vacuous feel to this, where each and every sound feels like incredibly important and urgent. So you feel like, oh wow, like what are they saying right now? What is if they are saying anything? As soon as they do start talking, you're trying to make out what they have to say, because you're like, I've just been sitting through 12 minutes of I can't even remember, and now they're talking, and all of a sudden there'll be weird just cuts and tape, and you just hear distortion, and then you'll just hear these weird drums that are just like ringing and reverberating. It's an absolute trip of an album, and honestly, if I put this thing on loop and I was looping it, I would not know what like year it was. If I had looped through 3 times, I couldn't be able to tell you what loop I was on, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what year it was, and I probably wouldn't be able to walk in a straight line anymore. It's incredibly disorienting. There's really nothing else like this thing. It is just a fucking puzzle. It's an escape room of an album. If you haven't listened to it, what the fuck are you doing? And finally, my album of the year for 1979. I was not expecting it. It crept up on me out of nowhere. But we've got A Trip to Marineville by Swell Maps. Now I'm gonna start my explanation for why I love this album so much, that I think it's the best, my favorite, so on of 1979. So if you're familiar with slacker rock, which I'm honestly not familiar with slacker rock that much. I know just a bit because I've heard the term thrown around, but my favorite band of all time, Pavement, at least as of right now, Pavement, they're considered like the kings of slacker rock, I guess. So when I listen to Pavement and I pick up on why they're called slacker rock, and a lot of like the things that they do and the way that they carry themselves, the way they play, the way they record, stuff like that. And I honestly love it. I think it's amazing. Now when I listen to this album, I feel like this is like slacker punk, if that makes sense. And it honestly shouldn't make sense, because it kind of goes against what punk kind of feels like. I feel like there's a certain conciseness and like a real like drive, like a backbone to punk that keeps it like chugging. It's not quite like indie rock, where it can kind of be like loose and like flowing and whatnot. But at the same time, while this is slacker punk, it doesn't feel loose. It feels just fucking obnoxious, just absolutely obnoxious, which in its own way makes it even more punk. This may be so confusing what I'm trying to explain right now, and maybe I should just stop. So I will. This sounds like a punk album that is on fire and is being put out, kind of, but not really, and it's just kind of letting itself burn out, you know? Like, kind of like the album cover, honestly. Like I would imagine the band in this house that's on fire, and they're just still playing, and like slowly, each band member is like suffocating and dying in this burning house, and the music is just kind of like teetering away as the album progresses. Right off the bat, just extremely high energy, surprisingly catchy punk songs that I'm like, this is really solid. I'm like, whoa, these are some great tunes, like great punk songs. And then you progress through it and you're just realizing like these guys just don't fucking care. They're just playing however they want. They're playing so loud on top of each other, the timing's off. It feels really weird, and honestly, like it gives me like very experimental rock vibes. Although it's not like intentional experimental rock. It just is like over the top obnoxious punk that fuses itself into experimental rock. And by the time you get to like the last quarter of this thing, it's just barely even anything close to what it was starting. It's barely reminiscent of the album that you started with. There's like a super weird lo-fi aesthetic on his voice all of a sudden where it sounds shaky. It sounds like they just bought like the cheapest microphone they could and just recorded it without mixing or mastering or anything and just like threw it over the top of the record. And I mean, it's interesting to say the least. And then you couple that with just songs that are 7 minutes of a band falling apart, and then you throw in these really weird interludes that are so like interesting. I don't know, I guess I haven't really heard too many albums with interludes when I was searching 1979. I don't know how many people were really doing interludes, but they are a real like tone shift in the project where you're like, wow, you just listen to a band like sound like they're on fire and they're melting, and then now there's like this really weird like teetering instrumental and you just hear people talking and you're like, what is going on? And then all of a sudden, next track, we're back. The band is half of what it was. There's this really weird, I don't know, I feel like this is a whole thing. It's just a project to be unlocked. It's a real creative project that I feel like is the sort of genius that can only happen once, you know? It's one of those where you're like, nothing like this is going to come along again. Like, it is just a spur of creative genius of how the hell did they think to make something like this? Like, I wish I would have made this. And although they didn't have that much commercial success, it's easy to see that they've obviously influenced bands like Pavement, for example. Like, I would be surprised if the folks over at Pavement had not heard this album or of this band, Swell Maps. So yeah, that's it. Those are my 1979 Album of the Year picks. I hope you enjoyed. If I didn't include a certain album, or you think that maybe I missed a certain album from this year that you love, comment it down below. Follow me at WahWahMusic, because I'm going to do another one of these. We're going to do part 5. Don't know what year yet, but we're going to figure it out. And I want you to be there to recommend me your favorite album from that year, so that way I don't miss it and I can factor it into the list if I choose to. Besides that, only 10% of my viewers are actually subscribed. Make sure that you subscribe and like this video so that way you can be informed and be ready when the next WahWah.music banger drops. Yeah, much love, y'all. Mwah, mwah, mwah. See you next time. Wow.